Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, in PG Island, in Mexico, in Spain, in Africa, to the United Kingdom, and also to our brethren in Australia. And to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad, greetings and may the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 26 on the subject, the wave sheep and the wave loaves. I would like to read that statement in 2TG number 10, page 25, saying that God, in the time of the judgment and in accordance with His uniform dealing with the human family, in warning them of coming events vitally affecting their destiny, God channeled it through the prophets, according to Amos chapter 3, verses 6 and 7, sends forth a proclamation of the approach of the second advent of Christ. That this work is symbolized by the three angels of Revelation 14, and that their threefold message brings to view a work of reform to prepare a people to meet Him at His coming. 2TG number 10, page 25. And I would like to focus to the statement, in accordance with God's uniform dealing with the human family, in warning them concerning the coming events that vitally affecting their destiny. And the statement is very plain that it is even more particularly directed to God's proceedings in the time of the judgment. God employed uniform dealing according to our reading. And that statement in 2SR 238 saying, here we see another type. God's truth to the world before the Bible came coincides with His truth in the time of the Bible, showing that God has but one truth, one Christ, and one gospel in all ages. Therefore, the idea taught by self-styled ministers of the gospel that God had one method of saving people before the Bible came into existence, another in the Old Testament time with the descendants of Abraham, and still another for the new and the Gentiles, etc., is a deception of the devil, and there is no truth in it. Not only the things written prove the truth and exposes the error, but even common reasoning tells us there can be no justice in such an ever-changing method of salvation. For I am the Lord, I change not. In 2TG 39, page 6, it says, so far in our study, we have seen that God is impartial, that He has endeavored to save all peoples at all times in the same way as He is endeavoring to save us, that He is not experimenting with Himself, not saving us one way and others another way. And that one method of salvation is portrayed by God through the sanctuary construction and service as the plan of redemption is revealed according to SR 187, saying, in order to make a proper application of the seven seals, we must have a better understanding of the heavenly sanctuary service, its origin, and the object of its existence, as taught by the early sanctuary built by Moses. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 5. In the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. So this reading can be easily understood that the subject of the seven seals in the sanctuary is coupled together, cannot be separated. That it utters the impossibility to make a proper application of the subject of the seven seals unless we have a better understanding of the heavenly sanctuary service according to the voice of inspiration. For it is through the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. And that is why the great controversy 423 declared that through the sanctuary doctrine is open to view a complete system of truth, connected and harmonious. I would like to read the great controversy, page 423. The subject of the sanctuary was the cave which unlocked the mystery of the disappointment of 1844. It opened to view a complete system of truth, connected and harmonious. So the subject of the sanctuary, you can view the complete system of truth, of the plan of salvation, the plan of redemption. So our attention is focused to the services in the heavenly sanctuary. Now here in 2SR 268 saying, therefore, these two temples are types of two sections of the Christian church with the antitypical sanctuary service, made up of these two laws, the moral and the ceremonial law. The first section of the Christian church, from the crucifixion to about 538 AD, was endowed with just such a sanctuary. That is, they had a perfect knowledge of the work in the heavenly to that time, and their faith corresponded with its service. So, that is very plain. It is pointing to the apostolic church, the first section of the early Christian church. And that is the antitypical spiritual temple, or the antitypical sanctuary, by which God bestowed unto them a perfect knowledge of the work in the heavenly to that time, and their faith corresponded with its service. Now, I would like to re-emphasize again that if you will notice in the Acts of the Apostles, the name of the book itself, the Acts of the Apostles, it must be pointing to the time when the 12 apostles were evangelizing the world, preaching the gospel. Now, I would like to read again here in 389 on the Acts of the Apostles, saying Paul's last journey to Jerusalem. It says, Paul greatly desired to reach Jerusalem before the Passover, as he would thus have an opportunity to meet those who should come from all parts of the world to attend the feast. Now, let us read 390. It says, upon receiving warning of the plot, Paul decided to go around by way of Macedonia. His plan to reach Jerusalem in time for the Passover services had to be given up, but he hoped to be there at Pentecost. Then it says, at Philippi, Paul tarried to keep the Passover. Only Luke remained with him. The other members of the company passing on to Troas to await him there. The Philippians were the most loving and true-hearted of the apostles' converts. And during the 8 days of the feast, he enjoyed peaceful and happy communion with them. Acts of the Apostles, 389, 390, and 391. And notice, even in the epistle of Apostle Paul, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 and 8, says, purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast not with old leaven,
neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 and 8. Now, if you will read the entire New Testament from Matthew to Revelation, and more particularly to the Acts of the Apostles, together with the Epistle of Apostle Paul, and more particularly to the book or the epistle to the Hebrews, there is no such any verse ever recorded. The apostles admonished God's people at that time to observe the Day of Atonement, and neither the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Trumpets, but only the Passover and Pentecost, as stated in Acts of the Apostles 389, 390, and 391. So the statement in 2SR 268, let us read again the statement. 2SR 268, saying the first section of the Christian church, or in other words, the first section of the early Christian church, and that is the Apostolic Church, from the crucifixion, or in other words, from 31 AD to about 538 AD, was endowed with just such a sanctuary. That is, they had a perfect knowledge of the work in the heavenly to that time, and their faith corresponded with its service. So the statement plainly telling us that in the period from 31 AD onward, the voice of inspiration is plainly telling that there was already a services in the heavenly sanctuary, and the apostles had a perfect knowledge of that work in the heavenly sanctuary. And the mere fact that the only services that the apostolic church did observe in their days, in their lifetime, is the Passover feast and the Pentecost. And since they had a perfect knowledge to the work in the heavenly, plainly indicate that the only work in the heavenly in their lifetime is concerning the Passover and the Pentecost, by which the focal point is the wave sheaf and the wave loaves. Now, let us read again track number 3, 1934 edition, on page 72, supplement. Let's read, saying, our attention is called to the fact that the Pentecost after the resurrection is the pillar of the Old and New Testament church. For the names of the 12 apostles who received the Pentecost are written in the foundation of the city instead of the names of the 12 patriarchs or some others. The statement is very plain. The names of the 12 apostles that had been written in the foundation of the city, the New Jerusalem, they are the one who received the Pentecost. And to repeat again, who are they? The 12 apostles, by which their names were written in the foundation of the city, the New Jerusalem. I will no longer be reading, brethren, the entire page in 2SR, page 77. You can read at your own leisure. But I would like to read the last paragraph. It says, mark carefully that the woman's crown has only 12 stars. And in the foundation of the city, there are only the names of the 12 apostles. Which one of the two, Matthias or Paul, is not recognized by him who laid the precious foundation of the holy city? If we say Paul, we make him a liar. If we say Matthias, then his ordination by the 11 had no effect in appointing an apostle. What then? In the Acts chapter 1, verse 26, is the first and last we hear of Matthias, but not so of Paul. If Matthias is the apostle, then he surely is not as worthy as Paul. Which one of the ordination would be most honorable? Is it Paul's by Christ himself as he met him on the way to Damascus, or Matthias by the hands of the apostles? The question is clear. No man's hand are qualified to ordain an apostle, regardless of his high standing In connection with the gospel, the holy hands of Christ and His personal presence only can appoint one for such an office. This is an impeachable evidence. For the woman has a crown of only 12 stars. Therefore, who has the power to ordain another and thus multiply the stars? 2SR pages 77 and 78. So, the shepherd's rod plainly telling us that Matthias is not a part of the 12 apostles. It is Apostle Paul that replaced Judas Iscariot, according to 2SR, page 76, saying, the type corresponds perfectly with the antitype, for Judas Iscariot, being one of the 12 apostles, was cast aside, of whom Dan is a figure, and in his stead Paul of Tarsus was added, of whom Manasseh is a figure. And the shepherd's rod made it so plain that no one is authorized to ordain or to appoint any apostle. Only the holy hands of Jesus Christ has an absolute prerogative to choose who are they, the apostles. And when Judas Iscariot had been taken out as one of the 12 apostles, Jesus Christ ordained Apostle Paul in replacement to Judas Iscariot and not Matthias. Now, since Apostle Paul is among of the 12 apostles, now let us go back again to the reading in tract number 3, 1934 edition, page 72. When does Apostle Paul receive the Pentecost? Now let us read again the statement. In tract number 3, 1934 edition, page 72, it says, our attention is called to the fact that the Pentecost after the resurrection is the pillar of the old New Testament church. For the names of the 12 apostles who received the Pentecost, that is very plain. How many received the Pentecost? The 12 apostles are written in the foundation of the city instead of the names of the 12 patriarchs or some others. Now, the question is that, when does Apostle Paul receive the Pentecost? For sure, it cannot be in 31 AD, because at that time, Apostle Paul was not yet a Christian. He jealously persecuted the Christian church, the apostolic church, and he is the very one who consented the death of Stephen in October 1634 AD. And the very statement in 2SR, page 77, that Apostle Paul had not been chosen as one of the 12 apostles not until his way to Damascus. There he met Jesus Christ, and from that time, Jesus Christ commanded Apostle Paul to go to Ananias to receive baptism, to be a part of the 12 apostles. Then, with such historical event, brothers and sisters, let us distinctly separate the Pentecost to the 11 apostles and the Pentecost to the last apostle. And since the voice of inspiration says that, reading again the statement in tract number 3, 1934 edition, page 72, our attention is called to the fact that the Pentecost after the resurrection. But in this reading, we can easily recognize that there are two Pentecosts after the resurrection. The Pentecost in 31 AD, by which there are only 11 apostles who received that Pentecost. And since the voice of inspiration made it so plain that there are 12 apostles that received the Pentecost, then without any doubts, after the baptism of Apostle Paul in 34 AD, he received the Pentecost in 35 AD. And the Pentecost in 31 AD is the pillar of the Old Testament, whereas the Pentecost on 35 AD must be the pillar of the New Testament church, according to our reading. And the only way that we could be able to grasp the true meaning of this very important subject, the wave sheep and the wave loaves, or in other words, the offering of the wave sheep and the offering of the wave loaves. The offering of the wave sheep, it must be on the first day of the week, Sunday. The offering of the wave loaves, the same. It must be offered on the first day of the week, Sunday. Both of them was not presented before the Lord on a special day of the month, but rather on a special day of the week, as stated by the shepherd's rod. It says here in tract number 3 on page 78, the wave sheep was to be offered on the morrow after the Sabbath. That is on the first day of the week, now commonly called Sunday. This offering was to be presented not on a special day of the month, but rather on a special day of the week. Track number 3, page 78. So the voice of inspiration is very plain, brothers and sisters, that the offering of the wave sheep as well as the wave loaves, it is presented before the Lord not on a special day of the month, but rather on a special day of the week. Brothers and sisters, why? Because if you will say that it's a special day of the month, then it is permanent. But the date is not permanent. But the day is permanent. First day of the week, Sunday. And the best example is the statement in the Old Symbolic Code, by which we read several times, right? That accordingly, stated by the shepherd's rod in the Old Symbolic Code, 3 Symbolic Code, 8 to 10, page 11, saying, now the only disagreement between the shepherd's rod and the desire of ages on this subject is that the desire of ages says that on the second day of the feast, the first fruit of the year's harvest, a sheaf of barley, was presented before the Lord. The desire of ages, page 77, which places the first feast of the Passover on the Sabbath. Numbers 28:17. What is the first feast of the Passover? 15th. The 15th of the first month, April 15th. And the shepherd's rod is explaining that if the sheaf of barley was presented before the Lord on the second day of the feast, then April 15 must be on Saturday, thus making the slaying of the lamb and the 14th day, Exodus 12 verse 6, fall on Friday. So April 14 must be on Friday, according to the shepherd's rod, if the wave sheep is presented before the Lord on the second day of the feast. The second day of the feast is always fall on the 16th, because the first day of the feast is the 15th, but not all 16th fall on Sunday. But the divine principle, the wave sheep must be offered always on the first day of the week. And that is why it cannot be a special day of the month, because it changes from time to time. Because God is not the author of confusion, God of order. And to avoid anyone of being confused, the wave sheep is regularly, permanently offered on the special day of the week. And that is Sunday, the first day of the week. There is no other day by which the wave sheep must be presented before the Lord. That must be on Sunday. But that Sunday must be within the Passover week. And the commencement of the Passover week is April 15. Therefore, that must be the first Sunday after April 15. But according to the shepherd's rod, the Bible is very plain that Jesus Christ was resurrected on the 4th day of the feast, not on the second day. So let us continue reading 3 Symbolic Code, 8 to 10, page 11. It says, whereas the shepherd's rod places the slaying of the lamb and the 14th day on Wednesday. Therefore, the first feast on Thursday, so that is April 15, must be Thursday. And the second feast on Friday, that is the 16th. And so on, meaning 17th must be Saturday and 18th must be Sunday, the 4th day of the feast by which Jesus Christ was resurrected. The time by which the wave sheep is presented before the Lord. Therefore, the conclusion is that that statement in 3 symbolic code, number 8 to 10, page 8. Concretely building the absolute fact that there are different patterns of the Bible calendar. And since there are only 7 days in 1 week, therefore, there must also be only 7 patterns of the Bible calendar. And unless we could have a clear conception concerning the Bible pattern of calendar, there is no possibility that we could correctly apply this very important subject, the wave sheaf and the wave loaves. Now, since we already established the fact, brothers and sisters, that Jesus Christ entered into the first apartment, holy place, in 44 AD. Now, let us read again track number 3. Here in track number 3, on page 85, just as Christ and those whom he raised and took with him became the prototypical sheep, betokening the ingathering of the first fruits, the 120 of those who are to be resurrected. And of course, the statement of those who are to be resurrected indicates that they were already dead. Unlike with the statement in track number 3, page 84, for example, I would like to read to you. The reader will remember that those who arose with Christ on the 18th day of the first month, follow the chart on page 55, were immortalized and received into heaven as the antitypical sheep, pointing to the ingathering of the fruits that shall never die. And of course, that is pointing to the 144,000 living saints. Because in this subject, there are only 2 grains mentioned here, the barley and the wheat, brothers and sisters. And it is the barley that is offered as a wave sheaf offering. But the Pentecost is even more pertaining to the gathering of the wheat. So this subject, to repeat again, is closely connected to the subject on Revelation 6 verse 6, because there are only 2 kinds of cereals or grains that had been mentioned, and that is the barley and the wheat. The same with this subject, the wave sheaf and the wave loaves. There are only 2 grains according to the shepherd's rod. Now, let us read again, brothers and sisters, the statement. The reader will remember that those who arose with Christ on the 18th day of the first month, follow the chart on page 55. So, let us view first the chart. So, this is the chart on page 55. Because we are admonished to follow the chart on page 55. So, this is the chart. And in this chart, revealed the 12 figurative months. So, the subject, the wave sheaf and the wave loaves, is closely connected to the subject, the 12 figurative months. And also, here, you can see 7 times 7 equals 49. And then, tomorrow after the Sabbath, the Pentecost. So, the Pentecost, the 50th day, from the time when the wave sheaf is offered, will fall on the same day, Sunday. The wave sheaf is offered on Sunday. The wave loaves is presented before the Lord on Sunday. So, both of them is dedicated to the Lord on the special day of the week, Sunday. And then you see 50 times 7 equals 350. So, we have the number 350. Then 350 times 2 equals 700. Then 700 times 10 equals 7,000. Then 10 times 10 equals 100. These numbers is also explained in the subject, the flood. Right, boys and sisters? And 7,000, it is pointing to the 6,000 years plus 1,000 years, millennium, then 100 years, the little season. 100 years after the millennium. So we will explain it on the subject, the 12 figurative months. Now, let us go back again to our reading. Track number 3 on page 84. So let us read again the statement. The reader will remember that those who arose with Christ on the 18th day of the first month, follow the chart on page 55. So we already follow the chart on page 55. And it says, were immortalized and received into heaven as the antitypical sheep, pointing to the ingathering of the fruits that shall never die. And we know that that was in May 27:31 AD, that Jesus Christ, together that had been resurrected, ascended to heaven. So they were received into heaven. But when thus they had been presented before the Lord. Is it immediately in 31 AD? But was at the time when they were presented before the Lord, they point out to the ingathering of the fruits that shall never die. And we know that that is pointing to the 144,000 living saints. That is why I remember the statement in track number 3, I think 1934 edition, saying, numerical, page 64, numerical illustration of ingathering. Numerical illustration of ingathering. And the first numerical illustration of the ingathering that we are now studying is the 40 days. Although that is not the only number that points out to the ingathering of the saints. But at this time, we focus our attention to the 40 days. The 40 typical days. Now, let us read again, brothers and sisters. Remember, in track number 3 on page 83, track number 3, page 83, it says, and by the same token of logic, the wave sheaf and the wave loaves must have a double application, each to the dead and to the living, together comprising the total fruits of the antitypical harvest. So the wave sheaf and the wave loaves, according to this reading, brothers and sisters, must have a double application. Double application to the dead and double application to the living. By which the voice of inspiration saying, comprising the total fruits of the antitypical harvest. Or in other words, the statement in track number 3, page 75, saying, the ceremonies of the first and the second fruits of grain must accordingly unfold the truth concerning the first and second fruits of humanity. So the statement, the total fruits of humanity. Why is it that it is applied a double application, each to the dead and each to the living? Because there are 4 classes of the redeemed. One of the significance of the 4 beasts, according to 2SR, page 195. It says 2SR 195. The number 4 shows that there are 4 classes of saints to be considered in the judgment. How many classes of saints to be considered in the judgment? There are only 4. So it must have a double application, each to the dead and each to the living. So let us distinctly separate the application first to the dead, the 2 classes of the dead, and the 2 classes of the living. The subject, the wave sheaf, and the wave loaves. Or in other words, let us distinctly separate such offering of the wave sheaf and wave loaves, by which the significance is unto them, by which they shall never die, according to the voice of inspiration in track number 3, page 84, saying, were immortalized and received into heaven as the antitypical sheep, pointing to the ingathering of the fruits that shall never die. But in track number 3, page 85, it says, just as Christ and those whom He raised and took with Him became the prototypical sheep, betokening the ingathering of the first fruits, the 120, of those who are to be resurrected. So let us distinctly separate the significance to the saints that will be resurrected and to the saints that shall never die. But as far as the Bible and the shepherd's rod is thus concerned, when it comes to the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, it is categorized into 4 classes as stated in 2SR page 109 and 110, is stated in Revelation 11 verse 1 to verses 1 and verse 2. And accordingly, here in track number 5, page 109, it says, and as the measuring is figurative of the same work, then it leads to the conclusion that the temple, the altar, and them that worship therein must figuratively represent the 3 classes to be judged. Where? In the holy place. There are only 3 classes of saints to be judged in the holy place, and that is the temple, the altar, and the worshipers. Because the court which is without the temple, they will no longer pass the investigation in the holy place due to the fact that at the time when they will be converted to the gospel, at that time, the heavenly temple is already cleansed according to tract number 5, 110, saying it is not measured, investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out. For they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple, after the judgment of the dead, after the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net. They are those who by name, my people, are called to come out of Babylon, and who, with no unclean among them, come into the already purified living church of God. Although that is not our subject, because our subject is concerning the wave sheep and the wave loaves. I am just trying to emphasize the double application of the wave sheep and the wave loaves, each to the dead and each to the living. So let us distinctly separate the application of the 40 typical days by which the significance is to the dead, brothers and sisters. And it must be pointing to the dead which are to be resurrected, not to the dead by which they were already resurrected, because the reason that they had been resurrected is to portray the entire plan of redemption. That their waving, the presentation of that resurrected saints by which they were immortalized is only an illustration, a sample, as the term used by the Spur prophecy in 6 BC 1092. But Beti-Hotep used the term to serve as the type. The type not only to the dead but as well as to the living. But that typical representation is portrayed by the 40 typical days, the very subject that we are now studying. Now, let us go back again in tract number 3 in page 85. It says, just as Christ and those whom he raised and took with him became the prototypical sheep, betokening the ingathering of the first fruits, the 120 of those who are to be resurrected. So also when he entered upon his priestly ministration in the first apartment of the heavenly sanctuary and presented himself and his trophies before his Father, they became the antitypical sheep, betokening the ingathering of the first fruits of those who are to be translated, the 144,000 living saints. In the light of this parallel, the spiritual condition of the 120 before the apostolic Pentecost is clearly seen to typify the spiritual condition of the 144,000 before the future Pentecost. So what is the spiritual condition of the 120 before the apostolic Pentecost? And what is the spiritual condition of the 120 after the apostolic Pentecost? So we need to have a clear conception, because that is also typifying the spiritual condition of the 144,000 before that predicted future Pentecost, and the spiritual condition of the 144,000 after that spiritual Pentecost, or the future Pentecost, brothers and sisters. Now, I am trying my best to explain this subject in a more comprehensible manner. First, we need to establish, when does Jesus Christ entered into the first apartment, which is the holy place, brothers and sisters? When does Jesus Christ entered to the first apartment, the holy place? We read several times, right? The Great Controversy, 421, saying, let's read the Great Controversy, page 421. For 18 centuries, this work of ministration continued in the first apartment of the sanctuary. How many centuries? 18. 1 century is 100 years. Therefore, 18 times 100, that is 1,800 years. And since we fully believe that Jesus Christ entered the most holy place in 1844, then it's easy to locate the very year by which Jesus Christ entered the holy place. By subtracting 1844 minus 1,800, then you have the 44 AD. Brothers and sisters, you will fall in 44. And since, brethren, our subject is concerning wave sheaf, the only feast by which the wave sheaf is offered, it must be on the Passover week. There is no other feast ever recorded in the Bible except on the Passover feast. And that is why here in tract number 3, pages 78 and page 79, saying, coming just at the right time, in the season of the first fruits, the Passover week was the period in which the wave sheaf was usually offered before the Lord. Its ritual prophetically projecting Christ as the antitype of the wave sheaf. To repeat again, the only feast by which the wave sheaf is offered, it is during the Passover week. That is special Sunday within the Passover week. Now, since, brethren, we are trying now to understand the entire proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, I would like to read again the statement in Acts of the Apostles, 390 and 391. It says, at Philippi, Paul tarried to keep the Passover. Only Luke remained with him. The other members of the company passing on to Troas to await him there. The Philippians were the most loving and true-hearted of the apostles' converts. And during the 8 days of the feast, he enjoyed peaceful and happy communion with. That reading always reminds me the verse in the Bible in Romans 15 verse 4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Whatsoever things written. And that statement I would like to apply reading to SR page 92. It says, but if we love the righteousness of God as expressed in His law and determined to obey His holy word, wherever found Bible or spirit of prophecy according to the revelation by His Spirit, then we receive the power which enable us to fulfill the divine purpose, and thereby our sins are blotted out by the blood of Christ. And thus we are made free from the law and its condemnation, placed under divine grace. Wherever found, whether in the Bible or in the golden bowl. That is the only source of our study. And to repeat again, in manuscript release, book 1, 417, saying, each of the ancient prophets spoke less in their own time than in our time. And their prophesying is enforced for us. Now the statement, brothers and sisters, in Acts of the Apostles, 390 and 391, it was written for our learning. And that statement, in reality, is enforced for us, we living in the last generation of men. That God permitted His servant to record that Passover feast by which Apostle Paul celebrated, observed in Philippi. And since the record in Acts of the Apostles 390 and 391, that the last day is the 8th day of the feast, indicates that that is pattern number 7. Now let us go to the 7 patterns when the feast is offered. We already enumerated one by one the 7 patterns of the Bible calendar. It is only on pattern number 7 that the wave sheaf is offered on the 8th day of the feast, and that is April 22 Sunday. That statement, brothers and sisters, in Acts of the Apostles 390 and 391 must be pattern number 7, and that was 60 AD. How do we know that that was 60 AD? Let us go to the pattern. 182, you see, brothers and sisters, 60 AD is pattern number 7. It cannot be here. 67 AD, because at this time, Apostle Paul were already dead. So it must be here, brothers and sisters. Because historically, Apostle Paul died on 64 AD. And it is pattern number 4. So it is 60 AD, pattern number 7. Now, in this study, the mere fact that the recorded historical event that Apostle Paul observe the Passover feast. Pattern number 7, completely signifying that the apostles, brothers and sisters, there were a year by which they observed the Passover on pattern number 1, pattern number 2, pattern number 3, pattern number 4, pattern number 5, pattern number 6, pattern number 7. The entire 7 patterns of Bible calendar, because number 7 indicates completeness, to stand as the type, the pillar, both Old and New Testament. That statement, the pillar of both Old and New Testament, is the same with the statement in 3rd edition, tract number 3, saying, "Is he not the same vigilant Savior of the Old Testament as well as the New?" Indeed, the very truth is that Jesus Christ is the same vigilant Savior of the Old Testament as well as the New. And then it says, moreover, His personal care in gathering His people in those 40 days, which we see to be a type of His supervision of the ingathering of the fruits in every generation, should therefore reveal that He is the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world and the Good Shepherd in all ages. Or in other words, in that period of time, in the period of the apostles, that is the only period of time by which there is a proceedings on the earthly sanctuary as well as in the heavenly sanctuary. And that is why we call it the typical judgment of the living, because that is the only period of time by which both sanctuary are thus affected. And the shepherd's rod used the term. Let's read the statement in tract number 3 on page 84. The reader will remember that those who arose with Christ on the 18th day of the first month, follow the chart on page 55, were immortalized and received into heaven as the antithetical sheep, pointing to the ingathering of the fruits that shall never die. And since we already explained that there must be presentation of the wave sheep as well as the wave loaves, by which the significance is pointing to the ingathering of the saints that shall never die, the saints that will no longer to taste death. And for sure, that presentation, that offering of the wave sheep and the wave loaves must be one among of the 7 patterns. And that is why it's very important to understand completely the 7 patterns of Bible calendar. What pattern of the Bible calendar that signifying the ingathering of the saints that shall never die? Is it pattern number 1? Is it pattern number 2? Is it pattern number 3? Is it pattern number 4? Is it pattern number 5? Is it pattern number 6? Is it pattern number 7? One of the 7 patterns. Okay? Now let us read. And that's why, hoping that we could be able to finish this subject this coming week. I will try my best that before the next Sabbath, if possible, we could be able to finish this subject. And after all subjects will be completely finished, our next step is to summarize, brothers and sisters, to shorten, to summarize all the subjects. Now, I'm hoping that we are not among the lazy, because there is a statement, those who are lazy enough, because some people are weary of listening the message, brothers and sisters. Me with myself, even it is 12 hours, or even it is how many hours it might be, as long as it is the Word of God, I never feel tired, brothers and sisters. And I don't want that word in, is it in 1SR saying, those who are lazy? I think there's also in 1TG21, all who are lazy to study the Word of God, easily tired, brothers and sisters. And we don't want that spirit. It says, all who are too lazy to study, 1TG21:12, and who give the devil a chance to sow devilish seed in their hearts, making them believe that the preacher or the minister will take them through the pearly gates, having no experience of their own, are cheated of eternal life. They instead get eternal death. Now let us go back again to our reading in tract number 3, page 84. It says, their resurrection, so that is the resurrection in 31 AD. Those that had been resurrected at 6 a.m. and those that had been resurrected at 9 a.m. Those that had been resurrected at 6 a.m., they are the first of the first fruits. But those that had been resurrected at 9 a.m., they are the first fruits. And it says, their resurrection from the dead signified the beginning of the first fruit harvest of the 120 disciples who were to die and be resurrected. Therefore, it is called judgment of the living because they were still alive. It says, those who were to die and be resurrected. And we know that they are the last constituent under the third seal, typifying the last constituent under the sixth seal, judged while living, appointed to die. The term used by inspiration. Let's read here in track number 3, page 20. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the truth, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Hebrews 9, verse 24. Indeed, now once in the end of the world, hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment, the cleansing of the sanctuary. Plainly, therefore, the judgment is to begin and the sanctuary to be cleansed, not before, but after the fulfillment of the period for those appointed to die. Now, I would like to read again. It says, plainly, therefore, the judgment is to begin. So let us distinctly separate the commencement of the judgment. The judgment which refer first in the holy place. Now, to get a full beam of light concerning that statement, let me read to you here in track number 3, page 83. The apostolic Pentecost, in providing the power for the ingathering of second fruits, let us distinctly separate, brothers and sisters, the second fruits that had been gathered by the apostolic Pentecost to the 11 apostles. Now, let me show to you an example. So, that is June 7, 31 AD. Apostolic Pentecost, only to the 11 apostles. Because at this time, Apostle Paul was not yet converted to Christianity. Now, we know this is October 16, 34 AD, the culmination of the 490 years. Now, this apostolic Pentecost that had been poured out to the 120, by which among the 120, there are only 11 apostles. What is the statement? To gather the second fruits. Who are they, the second fruits that had been converted in the first 3.5 years? This is the first 3.5 years from June 7, 31 AD to December 7, 34 AD. 1,260 days or 3.5 years. So who are they that had been converted in that period of time? Let us read the first rod. Let's read the statement given by the voice of inspiration. 2TG number 6 on page 16. We must not overlook the fact that the gospel of Christ is divided the house of Judah into two sects, Jewish and Christian. Remember, it says the house of Judah, brothers and sisters. And it says, pointing to the Jewish and Christian, that the Christian church for about 4 years after the resurrection of Christ consisted practically only of Jews. Plainly then, the original Christians were full-blooded Jews. The Christian church is only a branch of the Jewish church, but they and their descendants have through the years lost the racial identity. Now, the voice of inspiration says, about 4 years, in that period of time, the only converts by which it was categorized as the second fruits by the voice of inspiration, all of them were full-blooded Jews. Now, in Acts 11, verse 19, Acts chapter 11, verse 19, now they which were scattered abroad upon the persecution that arose about Stephen traveled as far as Phoenix and Cyprus and Antioch, preaching the word to none but unto the Jews only. So it is up to the time of the stoning of Stephen. And after that time, they traveled as far as Phoenix and Cyprus and Antioch, preaching the word to none but to the Jews only. So that is very plain. Acts 11, verse 19. Who is he? The last apostle? That is Apostle Paul, right? According to the Bible and the Shepherd's Rod. Now let us read the testimony of Apostle Paul. I think in Philippians. Philippians chapter 3, it says, verse 5, or verse 4 and verse 5. Though I might also have confidence in the flesh. So Apostle Paul is plainly telling that he is among Israel by flesh. If any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more circumcised the 8th day. So Apostle Paul, and at the 8th day, from the time he was born, because that is the ordinances of the Jewish church, Apostle Paul was circumcised. Circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law of Pharisee. You see, Apostle Paul is in the tribe of Benjamin. Now let us go back to track number 3. Track number 3, page 76. It says, here we see commanded the observance of 3 harvest rites, the ceremony of the wave sheaf at the beginning of the first harvest, the ceremony of the wave loaves at the close of the first harvest, and third, the Feast of Tabernacles at the close of the second harvest. Being typical, these 2-grained harvests with their 3 literal sacraments accordingly foreshadow 2 soul harvests with 3 spiritual rites, the first of which is the first fruits with wave sheaf and wave loaves. Track number 3, page 76. It is a wonderful subject, but a little bit deeper, more particularly to the people who are not familiar with the Bible calendar. So those who wish to have that Bible calendar, do not hesitate to send your request and give unto us your email address, and we will send to you the PDF file concerning the Bible calendar from 4004 BC to 1 BC and 180 to 2180. And then you have the 7 patterns of the Bible calendar. So let us now concentrate on the reading, the one we read in track number 3 on page 76. So it says, brothers and sisters, that these 2-grain harvest within the harvest year, it is pertaining to the barley and the wheat. In the type, it is the wave sheaf, or the sheaf of barley is the very first to be presented before the Lord, before the wheat. But we know that in the actuality pertaining to the granting of immortality, it must be the 144,000 first to be granted immortality. And the 144,000 in reality represents the wheat. It says here in 1 SR 228, the wheat represents the 144,000. 1 SR page 228. And of all the subject ever recorded in the Shepherd's Rod, in this subject only, by which the Shepherd's Rod gave us such admonition, saying, in track number 3, page 78, care, therefore, must be exercised not to confuse the one truth with the other. Extra care need to be exercised so that we should not be mix up the one truth to the other. First, let us distinctly separate the occurrence that takes place in heaven and the occurrence that takes place on earth. That is the admonition. In track number 8, page 5, so correctly to understand this prophetic event in its entirety, we must carefully differentiate the part which takes place in heaven from the part which takes place on earth. This statement can also be applied to the subject, the wave sheaf and the wave loaves. Concerning the part which takes place in heaven, only those that have been resurrected by Jesus Christ in 31 AD, they are the only one that had been offered in the heavenly sanctuary. Tract number 3, page 80. From these facts, it can more clearly be seen that those whom Christ took with him were the living wave ship and the only one that has been offered in the heavenly sanctuary. They are the only one, no other, that had been waved before the presence of the Father during the Passover week. And those that had been offered, represented by wave loaves, during the Pentecost. Only those that had been resurrected together with Jesus Christ. Those that had been resurrected at 6 a.m., representing the first of the first fruits. Therefore, they must be the only one to be offered during the Passover week, because they are the first of the first fruits. And since the offering of the wave loaves indicates that the entire first fruits had been already gathered and completed, it represents to those that had been resurrected at 9 a.m. And also, we need to distinctly separate the presentation or the offering of the wave sheaf and the wave loaves, by which the significance is to the dead, and the offering of the wave sheaf and the wave loaves, by which the significance is to the living. So that is very important, my dear brothers and sisters. Now, going back again to the wave loaves, the Pentecost. In tract number 3, 1934 edition, it says here, tract number 3, pages 73, 1934 edition. It says, plainly then, there are 3 Pentecosts to be considered, 2 in the past and 1 in the future. The one after the resurrection being the beacon point. So the statement, the one after the resurrection, cannot be construed that only pointing to 31 AD. If that Pentecost after the resurrection is pointing only to 31 AD, then how could it be that Apostle Paul to be a part of the 12 apostles? At that time, Apostle Paul is not yet a Christian. Or in other words, he is not yet an apostle. He is called Paul of Tarsus. Not until in 34 AD. Somewhere in the month of November or December, he was baptized to Christianity. And then it was in 35 AD, that Pentecost by which Apostle Paul received the power to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. And that is pattern number 3, because 34 AD is pattern number 2. So, to repeat again, the statement after the resurrection must be pointing to the 7 patterns of Bible calendar. But it begins on pattern number 6. 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, let me show to you. Let us go to the pattern. 31 AD, pattern number 6. So, let us see the pattern. So, 31 AD, pattern number 6. And Apostle Paul, brothers and sisters, received the Pentecost on 35 AD, pattern number 3. But Apostle Paul observed the Pentecost in 60 AD. 60 AD, pattern number 7. So 7 patterns. Now, we need to look at 66 AD, brothers and sisters. This is the Feast of Tabernacles by which the Christians depart or escape from Jerusalem. And that was pattern number 6. Now, since the subject is 2 grain harvest rites, wave sheaf, Pentecost, and Feast of Tabernacles. Look at 31 AD, wave sheaf, brothers and sisters. The recorded Pentecost by which Apostle Paul observed, 60 AD, pattern number 7. And then, Feast of Tabernacles, pattern number 6, 66 AD, according to the historical event. So we can summarize, brothers and sisters, by just placing by pattern. Pattern number 6, 31 AD, to 66 AD, pattern number 6. This is the Feast of Tabernacles, when they departed in Jerusalem. So pattern number 6, then pattern number 7, pattern number 1, pattern number 2, pattern number 3, pattern number 4, pattern number 5, then pattern number 6. So that is easy, brothers and sisters. You see, you think it is just a mere happenstance, 66 AD? Two patterns, from pattern number 6 to pattern number 6. The number of the entire books of the Bible, 66 books. So, there must be 7 patterns. From pattern number 6 to pattern number 6, you will pass pattern number 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, let us go back to the statement in 1934 edition, track number 3, the supplement. So, let us read, brethren. It says, plainly then, there are 3 Pentecosts to be considered, 2 in the past and 1 in the future. The one after the resurrection being the beacon point and the true foundation of the church, also the only one historically recorded. It is the light bearer on the subject. But the statement says, both Testament, Old and New Testament, the Pentecost after the resurrection is the pillar of the Old and the New Testament church. Page 72, track number 3, 1934 edition. Saying, our attention is called to the fact that the Pentecost after the resurrection is the pillar of the Old and New Testament church. But to repeat again, it cannot be construed that the statement, the Pentecost after the resurrection, is pointing only in 31 AD. If that is the case, then this statement can never be reality. How could Apostle Paul receive the Pentecost in 31 AD? By which at that time, he vehemently persecuted the Apostolic Church, even consenting the death of Stephen in October 16, 34 AD, indicating that even in 34 AD, Apostle Paul was not yet a Christian, not until he met Jesus Christ on the way to Damascus. According to 2SR, page 77. Therefore, that was in 35 AD. The Pentecost in 35 AD, by which that was pattern number 3. And that is what I want to emphasize, because that is the beacon point, the light bearer on our subject. Let us distinctly separate the second fruits, brothers and sisters. The second fruits is divided into 2 phases. 31 AD, June 7, this Pentecostal power is to gather the second fruits. But who are they, the second fruits here? Full-blooded Jews, according to our reading. Full-blooded Jews. This is the Pentecost up to October 1634 AD. But we already make a specific date. That is December 7, 34 AD, the time by which Apostle Paul, at that time, brothers and sisters, were already a Christian, brothers and sisters. The first 3.5 years. What is the divine principle used by B.T. Hodden? There can be no first if there is no second. Let us distinctly separate the second fruits in the first 3.5 years and the second fruits in the second 3.5 years. The second fruits in the first 3.5 years, they were full-blooded Jews, whereas the second fruits in the second 3.5 years, they were mixed-blooded Jews. Jews represented only by the 2 tribes, brothers and sisters, by the 2 tribes. That is Judah and Benjamin. What tribe is Apostle Paul? The tribe of Benjamin. Therefore, the conversion of Apostle Paul to Christianity indicates that the 2 tribes were already completely gathered within this period of time, illustrated by the harvest rights, first, brothers and sisters, pertaining to the 2 tribes. The second harvest rights is pertaining to the 10 tribes. Or in other words, not until the 12 apostles had been completed, then that is the time by which the second 3.5 years, which is intended to the lost 10 tribes. And then, I would like to make, maybe tomorrow, I will show to you a diagram. Therefore, from, let us go to exactly to, from Pentecost to Pentecost. June 7, 31 AD, then 3.5 years, December 7, 34 AD, then another 3.5 years. This is the first 3.5 years from the first Pentecost after the resurrection. The second Pentecost after the resurrection, the Pentecost by which Apostle Paul did receive is June 9, 35 AD. So from June 9, 35 AD, another 3.5 years. Let us add June 935 AD. Okay, 1,260 days. December 938 AD. December 938 AD. This is the second 3.5 years or 1,260 days. The one that had been converted during this time is the lost 10 tribes. The mixed-blooded 10 tribes. Then we have the Pentecost in 39 AD. What is let us go to the 39 AD pattern number 7. So, pattern number 6, pattern number 3, and then pattern number 7. June 11, 39 AD. June 11, then. June 11, 39 AD. Then let us add 7 years. Then you will fall on June 11, 46 AD. So we'll explain that tomorrow, brothers and sisters, and we will give you a chart concerning that Pentecost. The first 7 years and the last 7 years. Now let us go back again, because let me read to you Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 464. It is no time now for God's people to be fixing their affections or laying up their treasure in the world. The time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes in secluded places among the mountains. Volume 5, page 464 and 465. So it says here that the time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. Now let me read to you the Great Controversy. The Great Controversy, page 30. Not one Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem. Christ had given his disciples warning, and all who believe his words watch for the promised sign. But I will no longer read the entire statement, because the most important part is the time. It says, at the time of the siege, the Jews were assembled at Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, and thus the Christians throughout the land were able to make their escape unmolested. Without delay, they fled to a place of safety, the city of Perea, in the land of Perea beyond Jordan. And that was 66 AD. Brothers and sisters, that was 66 AD. And that is pattern number 6. And it was in 70 AD, brothers and sisters, 3.5 years later, the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus. And that was in 70 AD. And what pattern is that, 70 AD? That was pattern number 3. And at that time, they were celebrating the Passover feast, 70 AD, pattern number 3. But at that time, all the Christians were already escaped. And that's why the Gospel prophecy says, in Great Controversy, page 30, not one Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem. Now let me read to you here in Bible commentary the statement given by the Voice of Inspiration. 5 BC 1123. 5 BC 1123. Since to be repeated. After speaking of the end of the world, Jesus comes back to Jerusalem, the city then sitting in pride and arrogance, and saying, I sit a queen, and shall see no sorrow. As his prophetic eye rested upon Jerusalem, he sees that as she was given up to destruction, the world will be given up to its doom. The sins that transpired at the destruction of Jerusalem will be repeated at the great and terrible day of the Lord, but in a more fearful manner. When was the early Christian church departed Jerusalem? That was Feast of Tabernacles. Now let us read track number 3 on page 82. Plainly, therefore, since the first and the second fruits of the literal harvest and its attendant rites foreshadowed a spiritual harvest of first and second fruits, they are to be climaxed by the antitypical Feast of Tabernacles. I saw the saints, says the servant of the Lord, in describing this celebration, leaving the cities and villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Angels provided them food and water, while the wicked were suffering from hunger and thirst. Early writings, page 282. The saints mentioned here point to the living saints, the saints that shall never die. Type and antitype exactly fits. The type plainly telling us that they departed from Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles. The antitypical fulfillment, the same. God's people in that predicted event, the Feast of Tabernacles. Brothers and sisters, according to the voice of inspiration, they will leave the cities and villages and associating together in companies. Now, let us go back again to track number 3 on page 76. Now, let me read to you. Here we see commanded the observance of 3 harvest rites, the ceremony of the wave sheaf at the beginning of the first harvest. There are only 2 harvests because there are only 2 grains, the harvest of barley and the harvest of wheat. So the ceremony of the wave sheaf takes place at the beginning of the first harvest. Second, the ceremony of the wave loaves at the close of the first harvest. So, the ceremony of the wave loaves indicates that the first harvest is closed, but the second harvest begins. And then it says, and the Feast of Tabernacles at the close of the second harvest. Now, why is it that they departed from Jerusalem at the Feast of Tabernacles? Harvest indicates provisionary time. So, if the harvest is closed, meaning probation close. So they departed from Jerusalem at 66 AD, by which that was the Feast of Tabernacles, indicates that probation closed at that time, and indicating also the close of provision in the antitype, when God's people will leave the cities and villages. Let us distinctly separate the period of time by which God's people leave the cities and villages during the Great Tribulation, and also the time when God's people leave the cities and villages during the little time of trouble. Now, let us go back again to our reading. To repeat again, 7 years, there are 3.5 years. Because 3.5 years plus 3.5 equals 7. And since there are 2 grain harvests, the barley and the wheat, let us distinctly separate the first 3.5 years and the second 3.5 years that pertains to the barley, and the first 3.5 years and the second 3.5 years that pertains to the wheat. Let us read 2SR. Or in other words, in this study, there must be 14 years all in all. 7 plus 7 equals 14. So here in 2SR, page 233 and 234, the last first and the first last. Coming back to our text, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. Revelation 6 verse 6. Why is the wheat mentioned first and the barley last? So here in Revelation 6 verse 6, the first that had been mentioned is the wheat, and then the last is the barley. Why not the reverse? Why 3 times as much barley for a penny to 1 of wheat? Or why not the reverse? Or in other words, as stated in 2SR 222, the divine principle is that to receive 1 penny, if you are commanded to harvest the barley, you need to harvest 3 kilos. I would like to illustrate 3 kilos, which is common in our days. But if the command given to you is to harvest the wheat, you need only 1 kilo, and then you will have the reward 1 penny. In Revelation 6 verse 6, the focal point is the amount of the grain to be harvested. But in Matthew 20, the focal point is the period of time. Brothers and sisters, the 5 distinct calls. Of course, the first call, early in the morning, illustrated that he worked for 12 hours. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 12 hours. And the second is he worked 9 hours. And the third one is 6 hours. And the fourth one is supposed to be 3 hours. But the last one is only 1 hour. But in Revelation chapter 6, verse 6, it is the amount of the cereals. And it says, why 3 times as much barley for a penny to 1 of wheat? Or why not the reverse? The scriptures are perfect and no flaw can be found in them. So that is the scriptures. You cannot find flaw in the scriptures because the scriptures are perfect. Therefore, there must be a reason for this order of arrangement, as well as for the quantity of its cereal. Barley ripens much earlier than wheat. Therefore, those hard first must be represented by the barley. Otherwise, the symbol could not be perfect. The barley then represents the Jewish nation, as they were hired first. Naturally, the wheat must represent the ones called at the 11th hour. It is marvelous how perfect the scriptures are. So, that is the statement. Very plain, brothers and sisters. And we will understand it by the subject, the resurrection. So it says the barley represents the Jewish nation. But that is only the type. We need to look at the antitype. Who are the antitypical Jewish nation? Without any doubts, from 1844, it points out to the United States of America and pointing to the antitypical Palestine or modern Palestine. Although the same in the type. Not all in Palestine are Israelites. Not all in the modern Palestine are Sabbath keepers. But it points out to the Sabbath keepers under the banner of the third angel's message, the antitypical Jewish nation. So, in this study, brethren, God wonderfully pictured out the plan of redemption from creation down to the close of provision. What we need to do is just to carefully study and connect one subject to the other. So we will continue this subject, brethren, on our next episode, and hoping God would help me that we could be able to explain it more clearly in a more comprehensible manner, and we'll be preparing some useful chart for illustration so that our subject will stands out distinctly and vividly. So thank you very much, brethren, for listening and viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful, wonderful evening.